I stood by the service entrance of the Providence Biltmore Ballroom, clutching a plastic cup of lukewarm water while my twin brother Stellan was being posted with vintage Dom Perignon. The lights were dim, casting a hazy golden glow over the crowd, a mix of our parents' wealthy friends, distant relatives, and people who just wanted to be seen near the fading glamour of a Hawthorne family name. To Stellan, my father, Lysander, bellowed, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. He raised his glass high, his silk suit catching the light. To the visionary, to the artist who will finally put our name back on the map. A degree in art history is just the beginning, my boy. You are the legacy. My mother, Rowena, wiped a theatrical tear from her cheek, clinging to Stellan's arm as if he were a war hero returning home, rather than a C-average student who had spent 4 years skipping classes to find his muse. No one mentioned me. No one mentioned that I, Tamsin, had also walked across the stage today. No one mentioned that while Stellan was barely scraping by, I had graduated summa cum laude from the architecture program. I wasn't just invisible to them. I was structural support, essential for holding the building up, but meant to be covered with drywall and forgotten. I watched Stellan smirk, that lazy, entitled curve of his lips that had charmed teachers and drained bank accounts for 22 years. He didn't even look happy. He just looked expected. He thought this was his due. He thought the world was his to inherit because Lysander and Rowena told him it was. They didn't know. None of them knew. My hand drifted to the inside pocket of my blazer, my fingers brushing against the cold, sharp edge of a folded document. It was heavy, heavier than paper should be. My father was toasting to a legacy he didn't realize he had already lost. They were celebrating a kingdom that had been conquered 6 months ago, and the conqueror was standing right there by the kitchen door, drinking tap water. To understand why I was standing alone in the shadows of my own graduation party, you have to understand the mythology of the Hawthorne twins. We were born 7 minutes apart, but in the eyes of Lysander and Rowena, those 7 minutes spanned a universe. Stellan was born first. He arrived screaming, demanding air, demanding attention. I followed silently, observing. My mother often told the story at dinner parties. Stellan was a battle, she would say dramatically. He fought to be here. And Tamsin, well, Tamsin just appeared. She was easy. We never had to worry about Tamsin. Never having to worry sounds like a compliment, but in the Hawthorne household, it was a life sentence of neglect. It meant I was the baseline, the control group against which Stellan's genius was measured. We grew up in a sprawling, draughty Victorian mansion on the east side of Providence. It was a house that projected old money to the street, but inside it was a museum of pretension. My father, Lysander, was a failed playwright who called himself a literary consultant. My mother, Rowena, was a sculptor who hadn't sold a piece in a decade. They lived in a world of high theory and low income, surviving on the dwindling fumes of a family trust fund. Stellan was the creative soul, the fragile genius. I was the practical one. I knew how to tie shoes, how to cook, and how to answer the door when the debt collectors came knocking. By college, the divide was absolute. Stellan was given the master suite because he needed the northern light for his painting. I was moved to the small room off the kitchen, originally intended for a maid. When I told them I wanted to study architecture, my mother wrinkled her nose. Architecture, it's so mathematical. It's basically construction work with a ruler. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something more expressive? They viewed my passion for structure as a defect. To them, functionality was vulgar. The financial disparity was the most painful part. The Hawthorne Trust was drying up. I knew this because I intercepted the bank statements. But for Stellan, the tap was always open. When he needed a semester abroad in Florence to absorb the Renaissance, they sold a family heirloom to fund it. He came back with a tan and 0 credits. When I needed tuition, my father patted his empty pockets. Tamsin, darling, you're so capable. We know you'll find a way. Stellan needs support because his path is ethereal. Yours is practical. Practical people always survive. So I survived. I became the architect of my own survival. I worked 3 jobs. I opened a coffee shop at 4 a.m., worked as a filing clerk on weekends, and spent summers as a junior draftsman, learning the reality of zoning laws and load-bearing walls. But my 4th and most exhausting job was managing the Hawthorne household. Because my parents were too artistic to deal with bills, the task fell to me. I was 18 when I took over the ledger. I saw the terrifying reality. They were hemorrhaging money. The heating, the water, the taxes, everything was always 3 months behind. I became a master of logistics. I learned which utility companies would grant extensions. I forged my father's signature on payment plans because he refused to look at ugly red numbers. I fixed the leaking boiler myself with a wrench because we couldn't afford a plumber, all while Stellan sat upstairs reading poetry, complaining that the house was a bit chilly. "Can you keep the noise down, Tamsin?" Stellan would yell as I wrestled with rusted pipes. "I'm trying to deconstruct Wilka. I'm trying to make sure we have hot water," I yell back. They didn't know I was the dam holding back the flood. They thought the lights stayed on because of their charm. They had no idea that the only reason the roof hadn't caved in was because the invisible daughter was holding it up. But living in the details gave me an advantage. I saw things they ignored. I read the fine print they threw in the trash. And that was how I found the letter. 6 months ago, an envelope arrived from a law firm in Boston handling the estate of great-aunt Cordelia. They called her a bitter spinster because she refused to fund their lifestyle. They assumed the letter was junk mail and threw it out. I fished it out, I read it, and as I parsed the legal jargon, the blueprint of my life shifted. I realized that being the invisible logistical daughter wasn't a curse. It was the key to the castle. To truly understand the architecture of my family's dysfunction, you have to examine the foundation. The Hawthorne family was built on a singular load-bearing delusion that we were special and that the rules of ordinary people, like paying bills or telling the truth, did not apply to us. My parents didn't just live, they curated. Lysander spent his days in a velvet smoking jacket, dictating thoughts into a recorder he never played back. He viewed employment as a vulgar distraction. "Capitalism is a trap, Tamsin," he would tell me, handing me an overdue electric bill. "We Hawthorns are spherical thinkers." Rowena floated through the house in silk caftans, critiquing the dust motes, yet never lifting a finger to clean them. But their greatest creation was Stellan. They didn't raise Stellan, they curated him. He was their mirror. In his laziness, they saw contemplation. In his arrogance, they saw confidence. The toxicity reached its peak during our junior year. That was the moment I realized I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource. Stellan was failing his history of urban design class. He had ignored the final project, a comprehensive analysis of light and shadow worth 60% of the grade. I, meanwhile, was deep in the trenches of my own studio final. I had spent 3 weeks hand-drafting complex perspectives for a library built into a cliff face. I had poured hundreds of hours into the shading alone. 2 days before finals, I came home to find Stellan in the dining room, his laptop open, surrounded by my sketchbooks. "What are you doing?" I asked. Stellan didn't flinch. He held up one of my drawings. "These are pretty good, Tam. A bit stiff, but the lighting is adequate." "Put that down," I said. "Those are for my final review." "Relax," he said. "I'm just using them as a base. Mom and Dad said it was okay." Rowena glided into the room. "Tamsin, don't screech. Stellan is simply recontextualizing your technical exercises for his theoretical paper. He's writing about the architecture of the soul. He needed visual aids." I looked at the screen. He had scanned my drawings. He hadn't just used them as reference. He had cropped out my signature and superimposed his own name, S. Hawthorne, in a script font. "He's plagiarizing me." I shouted. "That is my work. If he turns that in, it's academic dishonesty. We could both get expelled." Lysander emerged from his study. Tamsin, stop being dramatic. It's a collaboration. The mason lays the brick, but the architect gets the credit. Stellan is the architect of the idea. I am literally studying to be an architect, I screamed. He is saving his GPA, Lysander said, his voice turning cold. Stellan cannot fail. If he loses his standing, it reflects poorly on this family. You are strong enough to absorb the hit. You can just draw more, I whispered. It took me 3 weeks. Then you better get started, Stellan said, taking a sip of tea. He winked at me. A small, conspiratorial wink. He knew he had won. I stood there, shaking. I looked at my parents, completely indifferent to the fact that they were asking me to sacrifice my integrity for his laziness. In that moment, something snapped. Not a loud break, but the quiet, terrifying sound of a cable parting under tension. Fine, I said, my voice deadly calm. Use them. Good girl, Rowena said. I went to my room and locked the door. I didn't draw more. I had digital backups. I submitted my original work with a time-stamped log, but I didn't report Stellan. Getting him expelled would be too small a victory. I needed something bigger. I needed total, irreversible leverage. That was when I started paying closer attention to the mail. That was when I stopped just paying the bills and started analyzing the accounts. That was when I realized that the Hawthorne legacy wasn't just morally bankrupt. It was financially insolvent. They thought they were the curators of a dynasty. They didn't know they were merely tenants in a house of cards, and they had just handed the match to the one person they kept in the dark. The morning of graduation, Providence was drowning in a gray, relentless drizzle. It was fitting. I stood in the staging area, scanning the reserved seating section. Row 4, seats 10 and 11. Empty. No texts, just radio silence. When the dean called my name, Tamsin Hawthorne, summa cum laude, I walked across the stage without looking at the audience. I knew if I looked at those empty seats, I would trip. 20 minutes later, Lysander and Rowena swept in, disrupting the arts and humanities ceremony. They squeezed into their seats just as the announcer called Stellan Hawthorne. They leaped to their feet. Lysander let out a bravo. Rowena waved a handkerchief. Stellan sauntered across the stage, looking bored and magnificent. He didn't have honors, but you would have thought he had been crowned King of Rhode Island. I met them in the lobby. Did we miss you? My mother asked, breathless. The parking was a nightmare. You missed it, I said flatly. The real celebration is tonight, Lysander said, checking his reflection. The gala is where the legacy is honored. The gala was a masterclass in delusion. They rented the Biltmore ballroom, $12,000 they didn't have, charged to a maxed-out credit card I knew about. The room was filled with people who didn't really know us, drinking champagne my parents couldn't afford. I spent the first hour as an unpaid coat check girl while Stellan held court. Then came the speeches. My father took the microphone. Friends, he began, we are here to launch a star. My son, Stellan. He is vision. He is spirit. And a spirit like that needs speed. He gestured to the wall. A projector clicked on, displaying a massive image of a vintage 1985 Porsche 911 Targa. Stellan, Lysander boomed. Your chariot awaits. The room exploded. Stellan looked genuinely shocked. A Porsche. They hadn't paid the property tax in 2 years, but they bought him a Porsche. But wait, Lysander shouted. A vehicle of such power requires responsibility, and our Stellan cannot be burdened with the mundane task of navigating traffic while he contemplates the sublime. He scanned the crowd until he found me. Tamsin, come up here. I walked toward the stage, legs heavy. Lysander wrapped a sweaty arm around me. This is Tamsin, Stellan's twin. Stellan creates the destination, but Tamsin knows the roads. He pulled the keys out and pressed them into my palm. We are gifting you the duty, he announced. You will be the keeper of the keys. You will drive him, Tamsin. You will ensure Stellan gets to his openings, his interviews, his destiny. Let's hear it for the best sister and the best chauffeur. The crowd clapped. Stellan patted me on the head like a dog. Thanks, Tam. I'll need a ride to the Hamptons on Tuesday. Early. I looked down at the keys. The Porsche crust stared back. They hadn't given me a gift. They had publicly deputized me as his servant. My mother mouthed. Smiled, Tamsin. I didn't cry. My pulse actually slowed down. I closed my fingers around the keys. Thank you, Father, I said into the mic. I accept the responsibility. That's my girl, Lysander shouted. He turned back to the crowd. He didn't notice the look in my eyes. He didn't notice that I wasn't looking at the keys, but at the inside pocket of my blazer. They wanted me to drive? Fine, but they had no idea where I was about to take them. I retreated to the restroom, the silence sudden and clinical. I placed the Porsche keys on the marble counter. They looked innocent, but they were the final insult. To explain the weapon, I have to introduce the armorer, my great-aunt Cordelia. Cordelia was the villain in my family story because she had committed the ultimate sin. She worked for a living. She was a tycoon in commercial real estate. My parents called her the Dragon. They hated her because she saw right through them. The secret my parents guarded with their lives was that we didn't own the Hawthorne house. We were tenants. Decades ago, Lysander begged Cordelia for help. She allowed him to live in the family home for a nominal rent, but she retained the deed. For years, my parents lived in terror of eviction. I met her 3 years ago when my parents were behind on rent and too cowardly to call her. They sent me to Newport to beg. Instead of a monster, I found a sharp-eyed woman who appreciated grit. You paid this? She had asked, looking at the cash I brought. Not Lysander? He's in between projects, I lied. He's in between delusions, she corrected. Sit down. We developed a secret alliance. I visited her monthly, showing her the house ledgers to prove I was keeping the place standing. She taught me about trusts and equity. She became the mentor my parents never were. She died 6 months ago. My parents didn't attend the funeral. They sent flowers. When the letter from her attorney arrived, they threw it out, assuming the house would naturally revert to them. I fished it out. It wasn't a bill. It was a notification from Mr. Sterling, her attorney, to Tamsin Hawthorne. Per the instructions of the last will and testament, I met Mr. Sterling in Providence. He slid a thick document across his desk. Cordelia knew your parents would squander the estate. She also knew you were the only one keeping the roof over their heads. He opened the folder. She left the entirety of her estate to you, Tamsin. The portfolio, the Newport property, and the deed to the Providence house, you are the sole beneficiary. My breath caught. Everything. Everything. But she placed it in a blind trust until your graduation. She wanted to see if you would finish what you started, and she wanted to give you the ultimate graduation gift, the power to decide their fate. For 6 months, I held this secret. I watched them mock me. I watched Stellan steal my work. I watched them treat me like a servant in a house I owned. And the Porsche, that was the icing on the cake. When my father announced the car, I was confused. They had no credit, but I found the lease agreement. They had used an old document with the Hawthorne Family Trust routing number. The account they thought was a general family fund, but that account was now part of my trust. The dealership approved the lease because the trust had perfect standing. The payments were set to auto-draft from my assets. My parents hadn't bought Stellan a car. They had used my inheritance to lease a car in my name and then handed me the keys to drive it as a servant. I touched the document in my pocket, the deed to the house and a formal notice to vacate. I picked up the keys. They wanted a driver? They were about to get a crash course in ownership. I pushed open the door and stepped back into the party. I walked through the crowd with a new kind of gravity. I headed straight for the audiovisual booth. The technician, Dave, looked up. Speeches are over, he said. One more speech, I said, placing a flash drive on his console. And if you want to get paid tonight, you'll let me plug this in. I'm the one with the actual bank access. I slid a $100 bill onto the mixer. Dave shrugged. HDMI 2? You're alive. I walked onto the stage. The feedback whine silenced the room. Lysander turned, his smile freezing. Tamsin, he called out. Darling, sit down. Don't embarrass yourself. I'm not here to make a speech, Father, I said, my voice amplified and crisp. I'm here to make a clarification. The guests sensed the tension and turned to watch. Tonight, we've heard a lot about legacy, I began. We've heard about the Hawthorne name. We've celebrated the idea that talent entitles you to everything, while hard work entitles you to nothing. Tamsin, get down, Rowena hissed. You've had too much to drink. I'm drinking water, Mother, I said, dropping the cup. But let's talk about the water bill and the mortgage, or rather, the lack of one. I signaled Dave. The screen behind me flickered. The Porsche vanished, replaced by a dense legal document. The header was bold. Deed of trust. Does everyone recognize this? This is the deed to the Hawthorne house, the mansion my parents claim has been in our family for generations. Lysander started walking toward the stage. This is nonsense. Cut the feed. It's not nonsense, I said. It's reality. My parents don't own the estate. They were tenants of my great-aunt Cordelia, and when she passed away, they assumed they would inherit it. The slide changed. Last will and testament. They didn't read the will. If they had, they would know that Aunt Cordelia left the entire estate, the house, the investments, the land, to one person, the only Hawthorne who ever visited her. I paused, looking down at Lysander. She left it to me. A gasp rippled through the room. I am the sole beneficiary, I announced, which makes me the landlord. Stop this, Stellan shouted, pushing past our mother. Who cares about some paper? It's our house. It's my house, Stellan. And that brings me to my next point. Slide change. Notice of lease termination. My tenants are 6 months in arrears. Lysander Rowena, consider this your 30-day notice. I am terminating your tenancy. You need to vacate by July 1st. I have contractors coming to renovate. I'm turning Stellan's studio into a home office. Rowena shrieked, You ungrateful witch! We are your parents. You can't evict us. I can. And I am, but I'm sure Stellan can support you. He's a visionary, right? Stellan looked frantic. He pointed to the door. Fine, keep the house. I have my car. I have the Porsche. Give me the keys. Tamsin, I smiled. The car. Let's check the paperwork. Slide change. Vehicle lease agreement. My father didn't buy that car. He leased it using the routing number for the Hawthorne Family Trust. He thought it was family money. But that trust is now a subsidiary of my estate. You used my money to lease a car in the name of a trust I control. I held up the keys. Technically, this is a company car. And Stellan, you don't work for the company. You can't do this. Lysander roared. We gave you everything. You gave me nothing, I shouted back, my voice thundering. You gave me bills. You gave me neglect. You made me a servant in my own life. I raised myself while you were busy pretending to be important. The silence was suffocating. I am done being the foundation you walk on, I whispered. I am the architect now, and I am condemning this building. I tossed the microphone onto the stage. Thud. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I walked right past my frozen parents and trembling brother, straight out the double doors into the rain. The valet brought the Porsche around. I got in. It fit me perfectly. In the mirror, I saw my father running out, waving his arms. I put the car in gear and drove away. I drove south to Newport, to the only sanctuary I knew, Aunt Cordelia's estate. I let myself in with my keys, sat on the floor of the foyer, and listened to the silence. My phone vibrated all night. 47 missed calls. Text from Lysander. Texts from Stellan. I didn't check them until morning. Lysander left a voicemail calling it a misunderstanding. Rowena threatened to sue. Stellan just whined, how am I supposed to get to the Hamptons? Fix it, the mantra of his life. I typed a single text. Direct all communication to my attorney, Mr. Sterling. The next 30 days were a masterclass in reality. My parents tried to sue. The case was dismissed in 20 minutes. They tried emotional blackmail. I forwarded their emails to the movers. On July 1st, eviction day, I drove the Porsche back to Providence. I stood across the street, watching the movers carry out the furniture. Without the pretension, their possessions looked like junk. Lysander stood on the sidewalk, clutching a box of manuscripts, looking small and defeated. Rowena was sobbing over a chandelier she couldn't keep. Then Stellan walked over. He carried a backpack and a guitar case. The golden glow was gone. So he said, kicking the sidewalk. You really made us homeless. I just stopped paying for the illusion, I said. You're 22. You can work. I'm an artist, he spat. I can't work at Starbucks, then starve, or paint something people buy. That's freedom, Stellan. Where are we supposed to go? He asked, his voice cracking. I paid for a 6-month lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Pawtucket, I said, handing him a slip. It's clean. It's safe. After 6 months, you're on your own. Pawtucket, he sneered. It was a working-class town, far from the east side. Take it or leave it. He snatched the paper. I hate you. I know. But, unlike Mom and Dad, I won't charge you for the privilege of being related to me. I watched him walk back to our parents. They huddled together, a trifecta of displacement. They looked like strangers. I spent the next year gutting the Hawthorne house. I tore down the velvet drapes and fixed the structural rot they had ignored. I made the house strong again, then rented it to a nice family with 3 loud kids. The income went into my own firm, Hawthorne and Associates. I hear from them occasionally. Lysander works as a greeter at a bookstore. Rowena sells jewelry on Etsy. And Stellan, I stopped by the art museum once. He wasn't curating. He was working in the gift shop, ringing up postcards. He looked humble. He saw me through the glass doors. He didn't wave. He just nodded, a tight acknowledgement of a new world order. I walked back to the Porsche. I had a meeting with a contractor. I had a skyscraper to build. My parents were right about one thing. I was the practical one. I was the builder. They just never realized that the hardest thing I would ever have to build was my own life, on top of the rubble of theirs. And it was beautiful.